is Kimberly J. So I'm just dropping in just to give you an update on where I'm at with my dissertation. And so this is for those of you who are following my PhD journey. I am still plugging away. I'm actually immersed now in coding all of my interviews. And so I'll talk more about that a little later, but the reason why I jumped on here, and that'll be probably a separate video, but the reason I'm jumping on here is because I wanted to share with you the discourse, the paper that I put together for a conference that I just presented at. A very magical conference, very informative, very just this really beautiful sense of community. I presented at the Mundo Zurdo Conference. It's Gloria Anzaldúa, people who follow Gloria Anzaldúa scholarship and activism. And so I was honored to be on a panel with two other brilliant scholars, Dr. Aka Aurora and Dr. Monica Modi. And so, yeah, it was just a wonderful experience, but I wanted to share my talk with you. And so, yeah, the topic pretty much centered our experiences through COVID-19, more from a spiritual activism standpoint. And so some of our thoughts, some of our feelings, using some of Gloria Anzaldúa's, some of her theories and some of her practices. And that's where I drew my talk from. And so without further ado, I would like to share with you my paper or my talk. So conocimiento, and before I begin, conocimiento is a term that can be used to describe universal truth. It could be used to describe knowledge, wisdom, and so I just want to preface this talk with that terminology because I'll be using it quite frequently. So conocimiento, courage, and compassion, a pathway to healing universal susto. That's the name of my paper. So this discourse is dedicated to my ancestors, those who continue the spirit work that I embody in the physical to use my voice as an instrument for personal and collective soul healing. So the arrebato of COVID-19 has forced a brutal reckoning with the soul wounding of our personal and collective bodies. It has exposed generational traumas and abuse on human and non-human nature, which continues to remain hidden in the pores of our bodies and in the consciousness of our souls. This susto, or soul wounding, is of such great magnitude that if left unacknowledged and healed, humanity will continue to implode. And now let us shift the path to conocimiento, inner work, public acts by Gloria Anzaldúa. She calls out the need to dismantle the personal, political, and cultural paradigms rooted in, and this is her quote, hierarchical control, fear and hatred of women, dominion over nature, science and technology's promise of expanding power, and the seduction of commerce that is poisoning our individual and collective consciousness. However, unfortunately, it is those very structures that are dictating and leading the discourse on solutions to pacify a global health, racial, and economic pandemic. Insanity, rooted in desconocimiento, keeps us aligned to a paradigm of fear, oppression, and control as both poison and medicine. In this paper, I explore Anzaldúa's 7 stages of conocimiento to examine my own unique journey through the arrebato of COVID-19. Ultimately, to explore how to navigate Nepantla within my Black female body. With a greater understanding of how I can liberate myself during this period of heteronomy or authoritative reasoning imposed by outside systems invested in my oppression, I can then extend that knowledge to envision a pathway for universal healing that integrates conocimiento, courage, and compassion. Lastly, I engaged with Anzaldúa to understand how the embodiment of healing and empowerment is our bridge back home to ourselves, our families, our communities, and ultimately our natural and supernatural worlds. Stage 1, El Arrebato, rupture, fragmentation, and ending a beginning. Anzaldúa describes this stage as an experience that rips you from your familiar home, turns your world upside down, and cracks the walls of your reality, resulting in a great sense of loss, grief, and emptiness, leaving behind dreams, hopes, and goals. As a spiritual teacher, healer, scholar, activist, practitioner, all of those things, my world was shattered in September of 2020 in the midst of our health and racial pandemic when my nephew, a brilliant, beautiful 21-year-old Black man, committed suicide. His light was snuffed out by his own mental and physical health issues, exacerbated by an overwhelming sense of disconnection from his Black male body. He was a genius that was viewed by society as just another nigga. The last time I spent with my nephew prior to his transition, he had come to stay with me for a few weeks to flee the social unrest that had unfolded just down the street from his campus apartment in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This unrest was as a result of the assassination of George Floyd. When he arrived at my home, we talked extensively about his desire to protest, to fight for Black people's right to live. However, he was emotionally and mentally exhausted, and unbeknownst to me, was internally fighting himself for his own right to live. As a result of the death of my nephew in the middle of the pandemic, I suffered a soul loss. I had become estranged from the part of me that wholeheartedly believed in the ability for my work to help heal and transform others. I repeatedly sat with the question, what's the point in doing this work if I can't even help my nephew? In this space, Anzaldúa suggests that you must find a way to call your spirit home, to reconnect, to re-engage, and reconstruct yourself, and which I argue can only be done with a spirit of compassion. Stage 2, Nepantla, torn between ways. In stage 2, Anzaldúa describes the place and space of Nepantla. It is the site of transformation, the zone between changes where you struggle to find equilibrium between the outer expression of change and your inner relationship to it. In this stage, as I had just lost my nephew to the pandemic of being born into a Black body, I struggled to make sense of the outrage and concern over the safety and security now of all bodies. My inner relationship to and with historical traumas inflicted upon Black people's bodies informed my inability to trust the very systems that perpetrated those traumas, was now eagerly and genuinely wanting to save my life from a virus. As time went on, I became hyper aware that during the most precarious times of the pandemic, it was the dispensable, unprotected Black and brown essential workers who were shamelessly sacrificed for the greater good of society's need for fast food and Amazon goods. Lulled into a false state of security by the promise of a vaccine cure, we were again on the front lines, surrendering our bodies in the name of capitalism. In this space of Nepantla is where I began to find my voice, seeking wisdom and clarity from spirit to assist me in navigating this complex reality between what this country's leaders and experts were telling me, who has never had a vested interest in protecting me, and what I know to be true, by my lived experiences and those of my ancestors. Stage 3, Kodolokyu state, the Kodolokyu state, and I probably mispronounced that. Desconocimiento and the cost of knowing. As I began to witness the fear in my mother's eyes from the perils of the pandemic and hear about the disproportionate number of deaths in Black and Brown communities as a result of COVID, I began to question the wisdom I had directly obtained from Spirit. Maybe, just maybe, this one time, the systems that have always been in place to commodify and destroy Black bodies were really sincere about protecting us. And the vaccine was truly a universal gift void of connection to money, power, and control. In stage 3, Anzaldúa speaks to the Kodolokyu state as a period of desconocimiento, or ignorance and denial. During this period, I wanted so desperately to believe in the greater good doctrine, only to be reminded that the greater good in this country is afforded only to the privileged few. As I settled back into the reality of money, power, greed, control, and privilege, even in the midst of a global pandemic, I began also to notice the dominant collective's rejection of my intuitive ways of knowing and crucial autonomous critical thinking that should be warranted during periods of uncertainty. My only recourse was to lean even more heavily into the courage of my ancestors, those who know truth from a higher place, a higher stance, a higher vibration, to find what Anzaldúa describes as the promise of inner knowledge, healing, and spiritual rebirth in the midst of this chaos. Stage 4, the call, el compromiso, the crossing and conversion. In the midst of this period of paradigmatic shifting that continues to expose internal and external pandemics of the soul, I bravely entered into what Anzaldúa describes as stage 4, the call, el compromiso, the crossing and conversion. In this stage, one becomes radical about trusting their inner authority as it becomes both a bridge and barrier for change and transformation. In this phase, you are required to make the leap alone and of your own will. As Anzaldúa so eloquently states, conocimiento hurts, but not as much as desconocimiento. I quickly learned that I would have to walk and stand alone to be in radical alignment with my inner voice, my spirit voice, that told me over and over again to simply take care of my mind, body, and spirit, that there was nothing to fear if I remained in radical alignment with my mission, my purpose, my truth, my health, and my heart. Furthermore, Spirit required me to extend this internal conversation out to any and everyone who would listen and receive the call to step into their own power as healer of their own bodies. Explaining that fear is a lower vibration that impacts our mental, physical, and emotional state of beings, that wellness is protection, and that acts of healing are acts of resistance. These key messages, as received to me from Spirit, were in direct opposition to the messages of mass media and hysteria espousing fear, 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 fear. Daily, I found myself rooted into a lived spiritual activism that rejected the subliminal messages of don't resist, don't question, and don't trust your body or inner knowing. In the words of Anzaldúa, the consciousness that created our social ills, dualistic and misogynistic, cannot solve them. Stage 5, new personal and collective stories. Continuing to navigate the multidimensional depths of transformation the pandemic was so cleverly inviting us to explore, I found myself creating and holding space for a community of women who were passionate about creating and sharing stories of healing, courage, truth, spirit, and ancestral connections. In this stage, Anzaldúa calls for the reconstruction and reimagining of our narratives to align more with our innermost sacred and spiritual realities while rejecting the knowledge paradigms created to force compliance and assimilation. She explains that the new stories explore aspects of reality, consciousness, hope, intention, prayer that traditional science has ignored, deeming these as non-existent as they cannot be tested in a lab. By establishing a communal healing circle in the midst of the pandemic, I bore witness to how our stories became our medicine. Stage 6, the blow-up, a clash of realities. My experience of this stage required me to be more compassionate toward those who could only make meaning of the pandemic through the lens of media, pharmaceutical, and medical complex experts. The immobilizing fear of death and illness that became our reality impeded our ability to trust anyone other than the perceived experts. Sitting at times very uncomfortable in this liminal space between my personal reality, which was shaped and informed by spirit, and the reality of my close friends and family shaped by fear, created what Anzaldúa describes in this phase as a clash of realities. In this stage, Anzaldúa calls for a practice of connectionness, in which, despite our perceived opposing stance, we find common ground in the desire to be healed, whole, and safe. From a connectionist view, compassion triggers transformation. Stage 7, shifting realities, acting out of the vision or spiritual activism. In this final stage, Anzaldúa speaks to the shift that occurs when you enter a space of transformation. It is a shift that is shepherded by spirit, embodied, and then activated in the physical. It is a lived spirituality that invites us all to explore the deeper meaning of healing, wholeness, and connection. This is the space where I consciously invite the power of spirit and my ancestors in to assist me with navigating the disconocimiento, disease, and disparities of that COVID laid to bear. Ultimately, understanding the spiritual call to action to awaken us not only to our need for healing, but also to our power and agency to heal our individual and collective mind, bodies, and spirits. Anzaldúa says, by redeeming our most painful experiences, we can begin to transform them into something valuable. In examining Anzaldúa's brilliant piece, I am clear that my journey, my path to Conocimiento is one of healing, transformation, and empowerment. However, this path, this journey to healing personal and universal soul wounding is complicated. It calls us to go beyond a theology and practice of survival to one of love. It is multifaceted, multidimensional, and messy, requiring us not only to seek, but to embody the consciousness of Conocimiento. Thank you all for listening. That was my presentation for the conference. And so I'm getting ready to run to another meeting. Please, if you have any comments or thoughts, email me, kdavis@journeyofwholeness.org if you want to get engaged in any dialogue after listening. So thank you.